Thank you, Tim. I'm happy to be here today to explain a bit about Section 401 and the water quality standards. It's a little less straightforward than some of DEP's regulatory programs, but basically I'm going to be covering the law and regulations governing DEP's 401 water quality certification of a license issued by the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, or FERC, for a hydroelectric project such as First Light that is under consideration now that the application's been filed. I'm not going to be covering the FERC process, which is very lengthy and complex, as many of you may know. But what is important here is that the law governing energy facilities typically preempts state environmental laws. So 401 is the program that DEP has to be sure that federal licenses for hydroelectric projects will comply with our water quality standards. Next slide. Okay, so we begin with the Federal Clean Water Act. And this was the statute passed in 1972 with the ambitious goal of maintaining and restoring the chemical, physical, and biological integrity of the nation's waters. And it envisioned both federal and state roles to do that. And here we're going to be focused more on the state roles. But basically, permits are required under the law for discharge of pollutants. And then, very importantly, states are to establish water quality standards. All states have them. And also to monitor and assess their water bodies to see how they're doing as far as the water quality goes, to identify any impaired waters. Impairment means they don't meet the water quality standards, and to require remediation or restoration to the extent they are impaired. And then finally, and this isn't a completely comprehensive overview of the Federal Clean Water Act. It's quite comprehensive, but states certify whether or not a federal license meets water quality standards under Section 401. Next slide. Okay, this is really the main course. It's going to be covered in the subsequent slides as well, the surface water quality standards. And these are regulations the department has. They're at 314 CMR4, and they establish the water quality goals for each water body in the state, designate uses of the water body, and set the standards or criteria to protect the uses of the water bodies. So again, each state develops their own water quality standards. They're fairly standardized because EPA has a set of regulations that specifies what their content has to be, and EPA does review and approve water quality standards. So there's some consistency, and there's also a long history and tradition of questions and answers about water quality standards. And then our standards cover these basic components: the classes of waters, designated uses, the criteria, and then these provisions called the anti-degradation provisions. So I'm going to be covering each of those in turn. Next slide. Okay, so the classes and uses, the classes in Massachusetts, we have Class A and Class B. This being Massachusetts, we have no Class C. All our waters are above average. So A is pretty much public water supplies, and for Class B, Connecticut River is a Class B. As an inland water, there's a separate classification for coastal waters, but those are designated as habitat for fish, wildlife, and other aquatic life, and primary and secondary contact recreation. So this is under the heading of fishable, swimmable. You may have heard that in the context of the Clean Water Act is the goal for waters. And then other uses as well can include irrigation, some industrial uses. It said they're compatible with these the fishable and swimmable uses. And then there can be numeric and narrative criteria to protect the designated uses. Next slide. Okay, so criteria are specific parameters for water quality. An example would be temperature. So water has to be above a certain temperature to sustain fish. That's an example of a numeric criteria. And then there are also some narrative criteria. So free from oil and grease, the free from standards is a narrative criteria. And they are implemented in the permitting programs to protect the designated uses and to ensure that water quality is maintained or restored. So, and they typically will function as water quality based effluent limitations in permits. So you may be familiar with that part of water quality standards and permitting under the Clean Water Act. And then importantly, water quality is considered impaired when the applicable requirements are not met. Okay, next slide. Okay, designated uses and existing uses. Designated uses these are spelled out in our water quality standards. One of the basic ones is the aquatic life use. And you can see there, it's the definition of a native, naturally diverse community of aquatic plants and animals. And it also includes, it specifically includes rare and threatened, endangered and threatened species. And it also includes the habitat necessary to protect those species at different stages of their lives. Recreation is a designated use, and it includes swimming, that's called primary contact, and boating, which is secondary contact. Again, this is fishable, swimmable. For Class A, it's often they're designated, not all, but often they're designated as public water supply. And then the other uses that can be allowed in Class B. There's another kind of use called an existing use, and that has a very particular definition. Again, it's relatively standardized in state water quality standards and some variations, but those include designated uses and any other uses that don't impair the designated uses that are actually attained in a water body after this particular date in 1975, which is again keyed in with the original passage of the Federal Clean Water Act. Next slide. Okay, and there are also these provisions in the water quality standards called the anti-degradation provisions, which again, all state standards contain these. They have protection for existing uses that those have to be protected. They have a category for high quality waters where if they already exceed the minimum standard, they have to be protected to maintain that higher standard. Again, the Federal Clean Water Act is serious about trying to keep water quality high and not allow slippage. And obviously, it's always a work in progress, but it's an important part of the program. And then there are some special protections for certain outstanding waters and special resource waters, which aren't relevant in this particular context. Next slide. Okay, so now we're back to Section 401, and this is a particular provision of the Federal Clean Water Act, which specifically requires that an applicant for a federal license or permit that has a discharged navigable waters or an activity related to that to obtain certification from the state. In that case, in this case, Mass Department of Environmental Protection, and demonstrating compliance with the statute. And other Section 401 are issued by DEP for 404 dredge and fill permits, issued by the Army Corps of Engineers, NPDES permits, those are for wastewater discharges, and then FERC licenses, which we're looking at here. The 401 water quality certification certifies that the water quality standards are met, both the criteria and the uses. They typically will include conditions to ensure that's the case. Denial is possible if the standards are not met. And then they also can include any other conditions related to any other appropriate requirement of state law. So that's part of 412. And then importantly, the 401 conditions become conditions of the federal license or permit. So you can see it's quite a powerful tool that states have with their water quality standards related to federal permits or licenses. Next slide. Okay, so now we're going to close the loop back to water quality standards and flows and FERC hydro licenses. So energy projects, again, hydro power facilities are energy projects, are licensed by FERC, so that's triggers jurisdiction under 401. Of course, they do typically affect flows. Certain pollutants may come into play as well, but flows are very important. And exactly how that would occur actually was resolved actually in a Supreme Court case, PUD number 1. It's a 1994 case. Don't say PUD, it's PUD. It was a case out of Washington State involving a hydro project. It was actually a dam, and the Washington Department of Ecology wanted to require minimum stream flows to protect their salmon. And that went through the courts all the way up to the Supreme Court on the question of whether or not water quality standards and 401 certifications could include water quantity or flows in addition to water quality. And the Supreme Court, in its infinite wisdom, said yes, they could. That water quality and quantity really, that was really an artificial distinction, because lowering of water of the quantity, meaning reduced flows, would impact the designated uses. So that was an important case. It was closely followed. There was an amicus brief that involved, I think, I don't remember exactly, but probably more than 40 states were involved. Massachusetts was involved, and so it was a very satisfying outcome, quite exciting at the time. The requirement is that in the 401 certification of a FERC license that the flows have to be maintained or restored to protect existing and designated uses. And our regulations at 314 CMR in 4.033B do require explicitly that. So that's our regulatory statement on that. Next slide. Okay, so here's the 401 certification of a hydropower project. What does it include? It includes quite a bit of background and fact finding. So and some of the facts that may be provided maybe from some of you. We have to find that there's reasonable assurance that the operation of a facility as conditioned will comply with state water quality standards, protect existing and designated uses, meet applicable criteria, and address any impairments that are associated with the operation of the facility. Also, they typically include long-term monitoring and mitigation plans to be sure that the project will comply with the water quality standards over the term of the license. Next slide. Okay, so what happens after it's issued? So there is an appeal to administrative hearing at DEP. A final decision by MassDEP's commissioner may be appealed to court. The FERC license is also can be appealed to federal court. The FERC license does include environmental concerns as well as other concerns. They do a different kind of review, but their licenses tend to be quite comprehensive. Interestingly enough, the water quality certification actually is issued before the FERC license, so we don't know the contents of the FERC license when we issue our 401. And after the appeals are resolved, the 401 conditions will govern, and our 401 will condition the operation of the facility over time. So that pretty much concludes a brief overview of the 401 process. I know some of you may have a good understanding of all this. For some of you, it may be may be new. We're here today, of course, to hear your comments and concerns about First Light's application for water quality certification of its hydro facility relicensing on the Connecticut River. I don't want to, in sort of going through this overview, there's no expectation that you will fit your comments or observations into this regulatory framework. Really, as we move forward, it's just to let you understand, to have a better understanding that DEP will be evaluating the application and public comments, really applying this framework to be sure that the project meets water quality standards going forward. Thank you.
Great. Thanks so much, Pam. Really appreciate it. And as Pam said, while the water quality standards are very important to how we look at issues and our analysis, your comments don't have to stay within the confines of those standards. And we want to hear from you about the application.